Excellent. All right. Thank you all so much for joining this fourth and final session of our 2024 Western Water Resilience Workshops. Today, we're focusing on empowering ag advisors to partner with small-scale growers. I'm Ashley Rude, co-director of the Dry Farming Institute. Over the past 2 decades, I've worked at the intersection of conservation and agriculture, beginning in the deserts of my home state of Arizona, moving through California, and now I'm in the Pacific Northwest, based in Oregon. Welcome to folks who are just entering the room. We're just getting started. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as you come in. One of the reasons I give that part of my background, where I've been living, is because what really excites me about this project and these workshops is how deeply connected our challenges and opportunities are across the West. I've gotten to see firsthand, from farms on the Colorado Plateau to northern Washington, how innovation and shared learning can really transform water resilience. I'm continually reminded of the power of connecting dots across the bioregion, of being able to see the patterns of care, community, diversity, and abundance on small farms, from the soil to the farmers to the watersheds. It's a really powerful antidote to the challenges of our dominant, transactional, extractive agricultural system. These workshops are part of a federally funded multi-year project led by American Farmland Trust to support water resilience on small-scale Western farms through collaboration and co-learning. And that's one of the things I'm excited for us to dig into today. Today, specifically, we're going to be focusing on catalyzing your power and collaborative partnerships, how to advocate for growers facing structural barriers. It's an opportunity to pause, to zoom out, and learn from each other. Many of you here in this room are already leveraging your power to create positive change for the producers that you work with through collaborative partnerships and by advancing equity for historically underserved producers. The session is going to dive into those themes a little bit more with insights from our presenters. And, there's such a wealth of experience here in this space. I'm excited for you to share it back with us as well. A quick glimpse of our agenda for the day. First, we're going to get started with some interactive exercises, getting to know who's in the room. You'll go into a breakout room with one other person to have a short discussion to get us prepared. The purposes of these workshops is to get to meet folks, and that's a great way of doing it. Then we're going to pause for a moment and create some space for resource sharing. I hope you've come with some ideas of upcoming events and useful tools. We'll share that in the chat. And live information is power, right? And then we'll get into some presentations from some of our great partners. We'll hear more from a collaborative project in California, focus on breaking down financial barriers for producers, and then get into some examples and approaches to advance equity. And finally, we're going to make a little space for practice. We'll have an opportunity to workshop ideas for advancing equity in your own work in small breakout rooms. As we heard from our main speaker last session, Addie, which was such a great session, we know it can be kind of uncomfortable to stick around for the breakout rooms and have discussions, especially if you want to bring a challenge or a change you'd like to work on. But as we saw in the last workshop, it was really powerful for folks to spend a little bit of time with other people doing some problem solving. So we're going to try to do that again today. Some grounding agreements as we begin. Please listen with curiosity and respect. Speak from personal experience and set aside your assumptions. Make space for everyone to share. And some Zoom guidelines. Please stay muted in the main room unless we've asked you to speak. Keep your camera on if possible, especially when we go into the breakout rooms. Use the chat for relevant discussions and take breaks as needed. We don't have any ones that are set up in the agenda. And finally, on the theme of partnerships, this workshop series is its own collaborative partnership with an amazing crew of people from Oregon, Washington, and California that have helped shape these workshops. So thank you so much to our incredible planning team who's made these workshops possible. Melissa, if you have that list that you could copy and paste into the chat so that everyone can see who's helped out. Let's make the most of this unique opportunity today to build community, learn from one another, and strengthen our collective impact. And with that, let's dive in a little bit. Teal, I know that you've got some of our information that we collected from the registration, because we have an amazing 160 folks who've registered for this event in total.
Yeah, the first time I showed these data in a graphical form was the registration data a couple days before the first session. So that was about 100 people. And since then we're up to 165. So added a lot more people from Washington, I'm noting, which is great. That's what I'm seeing here. Nice span of career stages. And then just one more graph to show you that a lot of people are working with underserved growers attending. So we're hitting our audience there, but still a lot of people who are interested and want to learn more. That's what I have.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a really fantastic group of folks. And with that, I thought we could use a couple of minutes to collectively share some resources out and any upcoming events that you may have. So in terms of resources that are good to share, any tools that you have that are really helpful in working with small scale producers, and any collaborative partnerships that you want to share here in the chat, just let us know who you're partnering with. Would be a nice piece of information to collect. I've got a couple of events on my mind. I know that a lot of folks who signed up in the chat, as folks on my planning team know, I'm terrible at multitasking with chatting and talking at the same time. So the Dry Farming Collaborative is going to be having a winter convening, and I know a lot of folks have shown interest in dry farming that signed up for this event. So it's going to be on the 5th of February from 9 to noon. If you're interested in being part of that winter convening, a great place to look is the Dry Farming Collaborative Facebook group, or we'll also send along a link to be able to sign up via email. And then I think, it's the time of year when I'm thinking a lot of the Indigenous producers in our network. And I think it's really important to guide folks to some of those producers as people are thinking about things like buying gifts for family far away. And so there's a Pacific Northwest Tribal Food Guide that great collaborator of ours, Spring from Sakari Farms, helped organize. I'll put that there in the chat. And it's a really great resource. I've been looking for one for California producers, and there's not one that's that specific, but there is a nationwide tribal ag guide that I thought would be great to share. Yeah. And if anyone wants to raise their hand and come off mute and share an event or any resources that they have coming up, please feel free. There's a little raise hand icon on your Zoom. Thank you, Brittany. We've got an important event coming up for Oregon farmers. There's been a lot of challenges around water access that our small farmers, particularly on the west side of the state, have been having, and Friends of Family Farmers here is a great leader in trying to organize and support those folks. Awesome. Small farm school. Great. Yeah, thanks, Diane, for noting that it's challenging for folks to access the stuff on phones. We'll make it available versus email. Hannah, feel free to come off mute.
Hi. So I work largely with educators and school children and school gardens. So my resources I'm offering are sort of in that line for outdoor educators. But Kids Gardening, which is a great resource many people are aware of, has an upcoming training for Waterwise Garden program. This is like in conjunction with a grant they were funded with. But there is a great PDF document I'll share in the chat called Waterwise Garden Explorers Teaching Guide. And these have really great interactive lessons that model water conservation for kids, and put it into sort of bite-sized applicable things.
Love
One
it.
event that they have coming up is Educating on a Changing Planet, Drought Resilient Garden Strategies for a Future, and that's a free webinar. So I will also share that link.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. I think we all could use those easily digestible ideas around water conservation, for sure. Thanks so much, Hannah. Well, keep sharing your resources in the chat as we keep talking today. I think we're going to head into our first breakout rooms here in a moment. So what that's going to look like is you'll be in a room with one other person, maybe two other people, depending on how things shake out. And I thought a potential discussion question when you get into the breakout room, introduce yourself. And that I think they're so incredibly valuable to helping us move forward in our work to better serve small scale growers. And I'm really excited to dig a little bit more into a collaborative project I'm super excited about in California between the Resource Conservation District of Monterey and California Farmlink. So we're going to open with that conversation and then head into a little bit more focused conversation on how we catalyze our own power, because we all hold some level of power, and how can we use that to make the change that we want to see. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and spotlight our next two speakers, Aysha and Laura, and I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves and share your screen when you're ready.
Just pin me. Okay, I'm going to share my
I did.
screen.
Should I pin Laura now or wait? Or
Can we both be pinned at the same time?
yeah, I think so. Great.
Okay, thanks. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah, it's looking good.
Awesome. Well, hi everyone, and hi again. I presented back in the first session in November, and it was a little more technical on irrigation methods. But I was really excited to talk a little bit more about structural barriers today. And so my name is Aysha. I work at the Resource Conservation District of Monterey County in California. I'm currently in Salinas, California, which is the heart of some very big ag. And co-presenting with me today is Laura. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. About that. My name is Laura Poliné González, and I am located in Auckland, but mostly serving clients or farmers in the Central Coast, but across the state as well. And I'm a senior program associate at the Equity and Conservation on Working Lands team at California Farmlink. Thank you.
So I'm going to kind of present first, and then Laura will present a little bit, and then we'll have time for questions. So what we want to talk about are conservation incentives for small scale farmers in our area, and specifically accessing state and federal programs. So I'm in Monterey County, California, which is we consider it to be the Central Coast. This is kind of a blurry map of California. We're kind of in the center on the coast. And this is what a lot of the region looks like. It's on the valley floor of the Salinas Valley. It's flat, there's fertile soil. In the wintertime, almost all of it is bare. It's very upsetting. There's a lot of rain and a lot of erosion, a lot of fertilizer loss to groundwater, and massive parcel size that is still irrigated even when it's raining. And so I am part of a small team. Our ag team is 7 people, and we focus on providing bilingual conservation technical assistance to small scale farmers in our area. There's a lot of small scale farmers who speak Spanish and are coming from Mexico. So we focus on working with those farmers, especially because a lot of public agencies in our area don't have Spanish language capacity. If y'all are familiar with ALBA, the Agriculture and Land-Based Training Association, it's a small school located in Salinas that especially serves the Mexican immigrant farming community. They're amazing. They own land. They basically have a farm incubator program for folks that want to start their own farms. And we work closely with them. We're at ALBA 1 day a week, and we build relationships with farmers there. We work with them on irrigation and nutrient management related topics. And then when folks graduate from the incubator, we continue to work with them as they move on to parcels outside of ALBA. So we work with ALBA alumni, also other farmers, but this is kind of the core of our of the network of farmers that we work with. And most folks are farming somewhere between half an acre and 20 acres. That's kind of what we're considering small scale in this region. So some common things that we're working on with farmers. This is a photo of me and one of my colleagues and some of the farmers at ALBA, and we're talking about flow rate of drip tape, which is a very very common topic for us to be discussing in that space. We work on soil and water testing. We support with application of composting cover crop and financing for those things. Help create nutrient management plans. We support with irrigation system evaluations and improvements if we can find money for it. We support with plantings for beneficial insects. A lot of times we'll do the maintenance work on hedgerows ourselves. And we support with winter erosion preparation, whether it's row alignment or cover crop planting and other things as needed. We try to be a flexible resource for this farming community, understanding that like we have our own ideas about what might be needed, but then if farmers come to us with a different need, we try to be available for that. And we are almost exclusively grant funded. So we're trying to be flexible with, and apply for resources as needed to support whatever farmers need help with. So that's the kind of the field level stuff that we've been doing. But of course, there are structural challenges. As we know, just getting funding for conservation practices can be a big challenge. If folks, a big problem in our area is, of course, irrigation system infrastructure. There's a lot of failing wells, which we often can't help specifically with the well because we're a conservation focused organization. We often can't find money to drill a new well, but we can help find money to replace pumps, replace pipes, and get above ground materials. Getting access to conservation infrastructure can be really complicated also for a lot of small farmers. So compost spreaders, for example, a lot of people don't have their own compost spreader. A lot of compost companies don't offer spreading services. So there's essentially one company that farmers can work with. And, that example holds for a lot of other conservation practices too. And then of course, long-term land access, always an issue in this part of the world. Most people are leasing land. A lot of people have 1-year leases. A lot of times the contracts are just handshakes. And if we want to build soil health, it's not really, that's kind of difficult to work with. And then of course, market access is also a major challenge. We don't have the capacity to work on that as much. We're more focused on the production side, but we partner with other organizations that can support with market access. So I want to talk specifically about funding for conservation practices, because that's the work that we've been doing collaboratively with Laura and Farmlink. So this is a photo of a workshop that we held to support farmers with applying for funding for different conservation practices. And we'll regularly hold workshops and then support folks one-on-one with applications for different conservation incentives, funding opportunities. Some of the larger opportunities that we help with. So basically, sometimes there's nonprofits that offer $5,000 or $10,000 at a time, and it's just a check that gets sent to a farmer, and that's awesome. Love to see that. If somebody needs to overhaul their irrigation system, which is super common with the small scale Latino farming community in our area, because a lot of folks are on marginal land with failing infrastructure, the larger opportunities that we're looking at are our state water efficiency enhancement program, or SWEEP, which will pay up to $200,000 per operation for energy savings and water savings projects. And the other one is, of course, NRCS's Environmental Quality Incentives Program. I've heard some different numbers of how much money that will pay, but I think it's something in the ballpark of $450,000 per operation, possibly per year. Somebody here probably knows this better than me, but it's on the order of a few $100,000. And the problem with both of these programs that we've found is a lot of the payment is done on a reimbursement basis, which is really problematic for low-income farmers, folks who don't have a lot of upfront capital. And basically they're expected to put together some sort of budget like this. This is a quote from a project that we're supporting with right now. A farmer, it has been quoted about $80,000 for a pump, for a new pump, and all of the labor and all the other materials that go into putting in the new pump. And it's not like a farmer is going to do like one piece of this at a time. Even if they did, like that $18,000 line is pretty intimidating to look at. This is a farmer who's on 12 acres and is growing mixed vegetables, and just does not have this kind of cash flow. So the challenge that we've seen is like, okay, he got this contract actually, like we put together a really compelling application, got it funded by the state, jumped through all the hoops we needed, for him to get awarded the grant. And now the problem is like, how are we going to actually roll this out when this farmer doesn't have this kind of cash flow? So we've been in conversation with California Farmlink, and Laura can talk a little more about what California Farmlink is and how we've been doing this. But essentially since 2021, we've had regular meetings with our partners at Farmlink to think through how we can get around the reimbursement challenge and get the smaller scale farmers access to the money that they've already been awarded, but just now are having some logistical challenges getting access to that funding.
Thanks, Aysha. So some of you might be familiar with the work we do at California Farmlink or with other Farmlinks across the country. But for those who are not, I got you. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do, who we serve, and who is California Farmlink. So we are a CDFI, which means that we are a community development financial institution, one of the few serving agricultural clients. Oh, this is asking me if I'm speaking in Spanish. That's funny. Sorry. So as a CDFI, we're serving historically underserved communities of farmers, ranchers, and fishers, but for the purpose of this, it's quiet. Can you hear me better?
That's an AI thing, Laura.
Oh,
you can
okay.
ignore that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry about that.
No worries. So yes, we are serving farmers, ranchers, and fishers, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to focus on the services we offer for farmers. So I'm not going to get into much detail about our mission, but something that I want to highlight is that we offer fair financing for these groups of people, as well as business education and support for owning or managing agricultural land. And the way that we achieve this goal is through two big departments. One first listed here, it's the lending department, where Farmlink provides loans to California farmers, including annual operating loans, land loans, equipment and infrastructure, and the last, which is what we're going to be talking about today, which are the conservation loans, through which we try to catalyze regenerative practices with low interests as well as no interest loans. And I want to highlight this one, and I want you to keep it in mind because we're going to keep talking about conservation loans. And it's interesting because in addition of the partnership with the RCDs, we are also engaging different departments within our organization to be able to come together and work with these products of conservation loans. So we have the landing department, and we also have the land and business department, where we house our businesses and innovation, resilience and wealth building, and the equity and conservation on working lands. Those are 3 programs through which we provide targeted, in-depth education programs, as well as tools and assistance to help farmers establish good land tenure. Please, can you go to the next slide, Aysha? And in the next slide, I'm going to talk a bit more about this long name program, Equity and Conservation on Working Lands. Of course, we have an acronym for that. We are the Equal Team or program, and we support equal access to opportunities for high quality land tenure and conservation programs, as well as promoting strategies for keeping land in agricultural production. So this big goal, we do it through the areas of work that are listed below here. First, we have a land portal, which is the platform that we use to do our linking work. It's a user-generated platform where landholders can post land opportunities or business opportunities, and land seekers can post a profile, and they can interact and communicate with a very cool bilingual messaging system, and just start a conversation about the possibility of linking. We also offer agreement building services. I want to mention that we are not attorneys, so we're not representing either party, but we are in a very unique and I think good position because we are multi-partial advocates, and we work with both parties, both the landholder or landowner and the potential tenant. And what we do is that we simplify language, we review agreements, we develop a whole menu of different options of agreements, and basically work in the negotiation process and help all parties to come to a mutual agreement for an agreement that is equitable and fair for everyone. We also have a 1-year-long educational program for farm succession planning, which is called the Regenerator, where we support the retiring generation as well as the upcoming or new generation to plan their succession, basically. We also hold some partnerships with land trusts and other institutions to increase land tenure opportunities for low income and low wealth, as well as farmers who are Black, Indigenous, Spanish speaking, and people of color. And then the last point here, I want you to refresh your memory to what we were talking before in the previous slide. It's the conservation incentives. So as I mentioned, this is basically part of it. It's a loan product. And also it's where we hold the partnership with the RCDs that Aysha was mentioning before. And initially, as she mentioned, this is a partnership that started back in 2021, even before I was with California Farmlink. And at the beginning, it was mostly providing the funding for the RCDs to do their amazing work and provide the technical assistance and be the boots on the ground partner. And through this process, we have learned a lot. And the RCDs have been very patient and graceful with us as we develop our product, which is a loan product outside of their scope of work, but they have done an amazing work of educating us and supporting us to create a product and a process itself that doesn't create yet more barriers. So it has been an honor and a great pleasure to work with them. And in terms of today's presentation, we're talking about partnerships, and I have to say that I strongly believe that without the RCDs, who are, again, those like the experts in both application process for these grants, but also in implementing the projects. We would have not been able to do it. And if we were able to do it, probably would have to have had a very long learning experience as we launched this project. And I just want to restate and highlight, as Aysha mentioned before, sorry, that's my doorbell. We are just trying to address some challenges that we have learned from our partners, but also from some of the farmers we work with in terms of how difficult it is and sometimes makes it impossible to cover the upfront costs for conservation projects implementation. Thinking of an example, for example, SWEEP, as Aysha mentioned, has thought of and have low income, LILW, it's low income, low wealth. Thanks for asking. But yes, in terms of like the challenges that it entails to cover those upfront costs, as Aysha was mentioning, $18,000, it's a lot of money. And that is a challenge that we had identified, and we have been in the thought process of how can we support with that. I was mentioning that, for example, this is something that it's not that Farmlink are the only people thinking about this. This is something we learned from our partners and clients. And I want to highlight that the farmers themselves are coming up with some creative ideas of how to address this issue. For example, been in conversation with vendors directly and asking them to wait to receive the payment if there is that kind of relationship. And also CDFA has identified this issue and created advanced payment options that are available for certain farmers that are eligible. But even with those alternative solutions, this is an existing problem, and that's where this idea comes from and this partnership comes from. Can you go to the next slide, please? So here we have a bit more detail about the Conservation Bridge Loan as it is right now. We recently launched a few months ago our pilot project. I want to highlight that it is a pilot project, so this is information that you're not going to be able to find in our website because we are exclusively working right now with clients that are referred by the two partners we have in this project. One, the RCD Monterey, and then RCD Santa Cruz. The intention is to grow this and eventually offer it to more clients once we learn from this process and yeah, have improved it itself. So there are a few things that I want to share here. In addition to the challenges of covering the upfront costs, something that we have tried to address with this product, it's giving the opportunity for borrowers who would not be otherwise eligible, who would not be otherwise able to qualify for a loan, to have an experience of accessing a loan that has less in-depth underwriting process, and for which the collateral, I like to think that the collateral is our relationship with the RCDs and the grant itself. So the reason why I say that that's the collateral, it's that, again, here the partnership is crucial because we're only receiving referrals from them. And something that we have identified is very important. It's that continuous communication with the farmer and learning about where they are in their process of implementing the project, if there are any issues that have come up. So that is a way in which Farmlink can maintain information that not necessarily comes from the growers. So yeah, also addressing that challenge. So I want to highlight a few things from this chart. First, it's that if you go to the first section where it says eligibility, part of it, it's working with a technical service provider, such as the RCDs. And the second part of this, it's what I'm most excited about, is that the lease aligns with the desired term or length of the loan repayment. And as Aysha was mentioned, one of the challenges that we face, structural challenges and issues, it's the land tenure situation. So what we are trying to do is, if you remember, our team, the Equal team, also offers agreement building services. So we are trying to offer this additional service here and using the opportunity, since the farmer, it's improving the property in a way, implementing, oh gosh, sorry. Since the farmer, it's improving the property by implementing a conservation practice, we are offering this opportunity to negotiate a better land tenure situation, a more secure land tenure situation. For example, right now we're working with a client, and we are working with the landholder to work on an amendment to extend their lease term, which is great. And then there are a few other things here that I want to highlight. For example, if you notice, the interest rates are different for the general applicant as opposed to the low income applicant. And the fees as well. And something that is like a clear example of things that we have learned from our partnership, it's the length. At the beginning, we were thinking of doing a 7-year maximum term, but we learned from the RCDs that there was no need for that. So up to 3 years was ideal. So just want to highlight again the importance of that partnership, and for it being an educational process. I like to think that for both parties, but definitely for us, and just how fundamental it has been to develop the product, to develop the process, to receive the referrals, to maintain the communication with the growers, and so on. Again, this is a pilot project that we are trying and working to make it available to other organizations. But as of now, if any of you have any questions that you might like to explore or ask, my email address is at the bottom left next to the, it's okay, there it is. So there's my email address, and I'll add it also to the chat. So yeah, I want to be a resource and here to talk about the Conservation Bridge Loan or any other of our services. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Go ahead, Aysha.
Yeah, I would just wanted to say thanks, Laura, and thanks everyone for listening. We'd love to hear your questions. Yeah, and both of our contact info is here.
Great. Well, we've got one question coming in from another great collaborator, Anna from Viva Farms, which if Aysha and Laura aren't familiar with Viva, it's also well, maybe Anna, you could come off mute and ask your question and share what Viva Farms is before you ask your question.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much, both of you, for your presentation. I'm Anna Choten. I'm with Viva Farms up in Northwest Washington, and we're an incubator farm quite similar to Alba in our style and structure, and we're in fact inspired and kind of modeled after Alba when we were founded in 2009. Yeah, Alba of the North, exactly. So this is all landing really close to home, and I really appreciate the presentation. My question is, so we've run into this issue a lot with there being different funding opportunities for infrastructure improvements, but them being on a reimbursement basis and the lack of bridge funding available. So this is super exciting for me to see, and I'm just curious if you're willing to share, Laura. I'd be really interested in learning briefly. We don't have to go into it too much, but the like how in depth the application process is for farmers, and then your process of like the evaluation and approval or denial process, and how long that takes. Because we've gotten some feedback from different CDFIs up here that there's, despite the fact that there's this grant that basically like makes it a 0% risk, they still have to go through their full due diligence process, and it can still take a while, which can sometimes be a hurdle. So that's one piece. And then I was also just very interested in your interest rates that are very reasonable, and wondering if you could speak at all to how you get to those. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think that's can you hear me well? I usually have issues with, okay, great, thank you. I think that's the favorite, everyone's first questions, and our favorite, because we get to hear it a lot. So a few things, and first of all, this full disclosure, I'm not a loan officer, so I know a little bit about this project from the perspective of the lending part of the project. But first of all, the process, it's not as in depth in terms of what are the documents that we are requiring. And we have a list of those that I can probably pull and share it in chat. And also, as I said, we are not asking like for a collateral as much as we would for many other of our loans, because the grant itself is part of the collateral, but also the relationship with the RCDs. So that is not as in-depth. However, we are still requiring for some of the documents, and something that I have learned, because at the beginning I was like, no, we should not be asking for all that. But something that I have learned, it's that this is also a project where we are envisioning giving the farmers the experience of building a relationship with a lender, and that entails a lengthy process that is not as long with these specific loans, but we still value like that part of the process of building the relationship with the loan officer and understanding the documents that they need to gather. And the other thing that we have done historically is that we have a specific person in our team that is the first like client facing person who asks for the majority of the documents. And this person can support the farmers to put together those documents. So they have someone supporting them in like kind of like building their case, or like, gathering all the documents. And it's a process that we call preparing them to be loan ready. So the loan readiness process. So like that's the first part of your question. And then how long it takes. We have separated the process for two groups of loans. Basically, any loan above 50,000 has some extra eligibility criteria and some extra documents, because those loans go to an external committee for approval. So those take a bit longer, and they can take up to 60 days in underwriting once all the documents have been submitted and we are just like internally doing underwriting. And then those that are up to 50,000 are, again, require less documentation, but also it's our internal committee that reviews those, and that internal committee meets once a week. So those are much more, I would say, fast. But again, it will depend on how fast a client can be ready to put together their whole application. And the loan officers would say that it also takes probably up to 30 to 60 days, depending on how fast they can put together their documents. In terms of the interest rates, at the beginning, we were thinking of having some low interest, even for low income applicants. And that's something we discussed with our partners at the RCDs, and they made it very clear that it made no sense for a grower who's low income to pay any interest on something that is supposed to help them like overcome a challenge, right? So what we did was that we have some funding that supports us to be able to lend money with no interest, because the interest is basically to cover our processing and administrative costs. So we do have many sources of funding. Again, I'm not a loan officer, so this might be a vague answer, but we do have some funding that covers those costs. And also we do have this whole process of analyzing our capacity for, how do you call that? Risk capacity. So yeah, that would be my answer. But again, if you want a more like detailed and like think this through, we could put you in contact with someone at the lending team that might have a better answer than mine.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate getting into the nitty gritty here as much as you can. We are going to have to switch to our next speaker. We've got a question from Elizabeth in the chat that you, if you have time, Laura, to look at and respond to, that would be super helpful. I know you condensed so much great work into a really small space, so thank you so much for your time. And I know Aysha may need to jump off, so just really want to thank you for your time. And I think this is such a great example, particularly what you ended on, Laura, with this idea that you use the power that you all have with funding from external sources to be able to cover those interest rates for the low income producers. And I think we're going to be talking and digging into that idea a lot more of sort of understanding the power that we hold and using it as we can. And with that, I'm going to transition to welcoming Chris Iberle from the city of Seattle, who's been working in food systems for quite some time. And I really appreciate you sharing your work with us, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Nice job with the transition. Are the slides up?
The slides are up. Your audio is a little bit muted, but we can hear you. Yeah. Like it just sounds a little muffled, I guess is a better word.
that any better?
A little bit,
A little better? All right, I'll try to speak up too.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Chris Iberle, he, him pronouns. I'm a food policy and programs strategic advisor at the Office of Sustainability and Environment at the City of Seattle. I work on our Healthy Food in Schools program, and I've worked on updating the city's food action plan. Before this, my other hat was working with the Washington State Department of Agriculture as a resource provider, working on farm to school and the regional markets and small farm program. Great to see a lot of familiar names here. I have to say, it's like a bit intimidating to be speaking in front of some of our leaders in food justice and farming and food sovereignty here in Washington, but hopefully I'll do right by y'all. And I'll just say too, I'm not an expert or even a novice really in water access and management, but this will probably be a little less technical and a little more conceptual, but yeah, I'll speak from the perspective of a white person involved in racial equity work and trying to do racial equity work within food systems at a publicly funded agency, a couple different agencies, and how I approach that, including work with small scale and underserved growers in a couple different ways. And yeah, hopefully that resonates and you see some parallels with your work. I think it dovetails really nicely, like Ashley mentioned, with reiterating kind of what Aysha and Laura covered, and maybe some ideas for how to use a similar approach in your work. And here again, I'm definitely not an expert in this, but and I know a lot of you here have a lot of experience in this type of work, but yeah, I don't get it right all the time. You need to learn and listen, and that's just part of the practice too, I think. So I'll just introduce kind of OSE and some of our work, cover some general principles for things that I use to inform kind of advancing equity in some of these different agencies, methods for catalyzing our power and privilege, and practices for developing collaborative partnerships, and share a couple examples. Just as a point of introduction, and the next couple slides are actually from the OSE PowerPoint template, which I think might be instructive for how we talk about prioritizing communities, most impacted by environmental injustice. That's definitely the perspective that OSE takes. I know we're at a city level, and that might differ somewhat from how other agencies might approach it, but definitely approaching environmental and food work from the perspective of prioritizing those hurt and harmed most by racial and economic and environmental injustice, and working on that in a couple different ways. And we take a place-based approach to environmental work, prioritizing overburdened communities in our city and folks that are on the front lines of the climate crisis. And so that's how we approach it. And I think too, this takes understanding the problems that we face historically. This story is the same that will play out in any region that you're in, urban, rural, with exclusion and disinvestment and discrimination that I think we have a role in addressing and counteracting the effects of that historically, and that continue to play out currently, and address that through shifting investments and changing policies to make that shift. One way in 2015 that the city particularly looked at environmental justice work is the Equity and Environment Initiative. This approach and guides how we do this work through community partnerships and centering racial equity and thinking about advancing health outcomes for communities most impacted. This is a good resource. I put the link in here, I think, to just see how another local or city government approaches this work in multiple ways, including just the methods for prioritizing equity in city and public programs. Just a quick snapshot of OSE's work, a lot of different types of programs. I work in our food policy and program shop on healthy school food and our food action plan. This is just a quick overview of what our Healthy Food in Schools program does, just insight into my day-to-day work on increasing students' access to fresh and healthy foods, supporting our school meal program at Seattle Public Schools, and growing partner and coalition building engagement in school food work. And the way we do the work, I mean, at OSC, this isn't unique just to the programs I work on, but I pulled a couple of examples of different just partnerships and ways that we do programming at OSC with community leaders and through multiple contracts and projects, both at WSD and City of Seattle, as I'll talk about. You know, developing authentic partnerships and relationship building is really foundational, I think, to how we approach the work. And then this is just a summary of the work that Regional Markets Program does at WSDA, Small Farm Direct Marketing Program, and Farm to School program that I'll pull some examples from. So general principles, just how I think about approaching this work is kind of like a community organizer, identifying community problems and working together to advance those solutions. So trying to set aside expertise if I can and think about how to empower and figure out how to use the skills and tools in front of me to advance community and, you know, in this case, underserved grower identified solutions. I think all the examples, the great work that Laura and folks in California are working on, you know, great examples, right, of looking at those solutions. Yeah, these terms are a little jargony and maybe loaded, but I think it's still important to talk about being an ally and accomplice, you know, allyship, using the privileges and positions that we have to support underserved growers. And accomplice, being an accomplice, if you haven't heard that before, is using our power and privilege to challenge and change the status quo. So working more on undoing the structural systems of racism or classism or sexism that affect all the systems that we work in, food and agriculture for sure included in that, and working through the system and our agencies and institutions to advance those solutions. Developing authentic partnerships and relationships, so really being collaborative. You know, I think looking back, it's just trying to build trust through doing the work, focusing on how do we advance these solutions, how do we work together on things that are going to make an impact and make a difference. And you do have to start somewhere. I think it takes time, you know, meeting people and organizations and really understanding problems and solutions. And two, without being extractive, right? Thinking about who's going to benefit from anything that could or should be done, and how to move forward with doing the work on the ground and kind of over the long haul. You know, I think it's often beyond a single project or program. And that also means that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to got to listen and continue to just be in relationship and be in the work together. Part of that, especially I think from the public agency side, is being as transparent as you can and also being realistic too about what's possible. What are the tools that a conservation district or an extension office or a state agency has, and making sure to, just be clear about that and realistic and manage expectations sometimes about what's possible, but also checking whether that your thinking around that is limited, right? Where might your privilege be limiting some of the visioning and thinking about what's possible and how to expand the realm and be pushed more in what's possible to accomplish within public programs and agencies that, you know, I think tend to have a little less transformational vision than a nonprofit or a community and grassroots organization. And I think on this, the last point here is just public programming investments, I think are important to position as a way to address inequity. Like I said, there's historical and current inequities in our society and systems, and a public program is a way to think about how to deploy our time and resources in a way to address those inequities and counteract them. So kind of the concept of targeted universalism, if you're familiar with that term, is programming that anyone can tap into, but we can be proactive about who we're trying to reach and how the work gets done and who can benefit to address those historical inequities and current structural racism and issues. So how might we go about this? I think we got to recognize there's opportunities for internal and external influence and advocacy in the very least. Pushing for, and not talking about lobbying or legislation or elections that, public agencies can't engage in, but public agency staff, but rather pushing for something that could or should be done. We do have ways to influence and inform, what those approaches are, and whether that's, using that, the tools we have to facilitate change and navigate systems. Being an advocate includes, I think, just providing information for folks that are on the ground doing the work with underserved growers and support organizations about how these institutions work, for better or worse, what the flaws are, but helping to identify where opportunities are to leverage for change, and that growers and organizations, underserved growers and BIPOC producers can benefit from. What are the opportunities? Understanding just what support's available, whether that's access to information or funding. I think one thing we probably all are experts in is being on listservs and plugged into networks. Just we're already our job to be aware of what programs or opportunities are out there, and that's valuable, and that's important to share out, best we can. Funding and resources. I'm going to talk even more about just shifting funding. Is definitely who gets funded to do what within this work. I think is one of the major ways to create change and try to shift resources and mobilize more resources by, for, and with underserved communities and growers and the organizations that work to support them. So some of those practices is being intentional around the work, prioritizing BIPOC-led organizations for partnerships, whether that's through contracts, or co-designing projects or programming or work plans for the future, or funding proposals with underserved growers and BIPOC producers and support organizations. Looking at who will benefit from the work that's ahead, and how that can impact and support and lift up folks from most impacted communities. I'll say too, to be careful to ensure the priorities of a project are actually authentically being defined by communities and leadership, not wanting to be extractive in what's going into a funding proposal that you might be doing in coordination and solidarity, with communities and organizations, having some transparency and developer relationships, and ongoing coordination before, during, or after a grant proposal, goes a long way. I've seen and been a part of partnerships developed with BIPOC leadership for grants that were well done and some that were not so well. So just being aware of that. I think listening and acting on priorities. So just responding to the call when asked. Humility goes a long way here. Just being available to listen and act on things that are being asked of you. Elevating underserved growers' voices and leadership. I think at any opportunity, especially if there's things in front of your directors or decision makers or even legislators, about educating and informing on what priorities are to address issues within agriculture, whether that's through hearing or advisory committees, reports or surveys or coalitions or testimony. And then within a lot of those, if it's an ongoing or even one-time thing, trying to build in funds to compensate people for their time. Folks that are underserved growers and organizations to have the funding to be a part of those conversations and those tables. Like I said, I think a lot of this does come down to who has the money and resources to do and funding to do the work. So I think it's important to shift resources to underserved growers and support organizations wherever, however possible. So that might be writing in or requesting funds with growers and BIPOC-led support organizations in mind, whether it's a grant proposal or something else, and then seeing if there's opportunity to support funding appeals, whether it's just being aware of funding that's available, or over time, maybe someone will come ask for a letter of support or project and proposal concept advice, or trying to figure out what an RFP or solicitation is looking for, letter of recommendation. So just being able to say yes, I think, as much as possible is the point here. And I'll end with a couple of examples from work that I've done or is in the works right now. Through the WSDA, we worked a lot on farm to school market development and access. So we're trying to be intentional about that and focus on underserved growers. Washington State, a lot of Latinx, Latino, Latina growers and producers, and partnered with Viva Farms, for example, on some of that. Black and Hmong growers in Washington State, tribal seafood enterprises, try to support in particular and prioritize plugging them into what the market opportunities are around farm to school. So outreach and awareness with market opportunities, influencing purchasing decisions that schools might make around incorporating and prioritizing underserved and underrepresented food producers in farm to school. We developed a Tribal and Traditional Foods Institute that was both scoping a application to USDA Farm to School grant that we worked with Tahoma Peak Solutions, and it's a native-led firm, an educator around food sovereignty to develop and have funding to give a training for tribal schools around traditional and native foods in farm to school and school meal programs. And then City of Seattle, working on a values-based food purchasing framework with the development of that project. There's a core team of 8 food justice leaders. Jolimar and Nadasha both are here today. Shout out to them for being on the leadership team. Working with, again, a Native and women-owned firm, Tahoma Peak Solutions, to coordinate that project and have project goals that are working in those goals and results of that project to have equity, racial equity, and other values instilled into purchasing policies with implementation strategies across multiple city departments and food programs. Worked on a school meals and food education working group that both the participants and process included outreach and invites to have that working group intentionally focus on BIPOC participants and ally organizations, student voices, being a part of that in school meals, particularly BIPOC students, guiding the group's priorities by partnering in particular with student empowerment organizations, and the decision-making process for, what those priorities are, incorporated methods to prioritize BIPOC voices. And then the Food Action Plan update was part of working on that, particularly engagement with 250 community leaders through interviews and focus groups, including stipends for folks' time spent on that, and did regular consultation with an environmental justice committee on the plan update and content process. And yeah, I will pause there for questions or comments.
Ooh, you went through a lot, Chris. Thank you so much. That was really awesome. So many important points that I wish we could pause on. And I really welcome questions to come through in the chat, or folks, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, we can do that too. Well, I'll keep you pinned for a little bit, Chris. One of the points that kind of made me pause that you brought up that I thought was really important is this idea of when you're co-designing a grant proposal with folks and trying to really center BIPOC organizations. And sometimes that can be done well and sometimes not as well, right? And I think it's important what you said, that to sort of check that process before, during, and after. Like, we do have a point. I think a lot of times we get, we spend several weeks writing a grant proposal if we're lucky that we have that much time, and then we get it many months later and we might have forgotten what the intent was behind that project, or how to really center folks. And it's so important to sort of slow down and make sure that we're still headed in the right direction. And if we're going off the rails, to stop ourselves and kind of look back and say, are we still really engaging the BIPOC-led organizations in a way that is centering their needs and their voices, and continuing to do that. Yeah, so many great points, and I really appreciate you showing the tangible examples of how you've been able to do that work. I'm curious if there's any questions from the room for folks. You see that, Chris? There's a question about Portland city government.
Yeah, we're actually talked with Portland sustainability folks, but I'm not aware of, I don't believe there's a like food policy shop in the same way or food policy staff in Portland city government. So we've wondered about that and tried to engage with folks on that. But I was talking with someone at the Health conference recently from Oregon who basically the same assessment. There's not much. We used to have a food policy council in Seattle too, but that actually also disbanded. Though there's a great community-led food policy work happening with the Rainier Beach Action Coalition. So there's definitely more to unpack there with.
And it seems to me that most of the work that's happening in that space is coming through the grant program in Portland. The Portland Clean Energy Fund, otherwise known as PCEF, is a place where some of these funding for ag projects in particular. But it's a little bit dispersed.
I would be remiss if I didn't, and this is part of the story too, is that a lot of the Food Action Plan and our Healthy Clean Schools work and amazing Food Equity Fund grant program that we have in Seattle is because of the sweet beverage tax. So that, which was also advocated for by most impacted communities and community leaders in Seattle. So we're lucky and privileged to have that funding support, particularly around food systems work.
It's huge. Any other questions from the room? Here we go. One's from Aysha. Do you find that there's a divide between food justice work happening in Seattle and organizing work happening in the more rural parts of the state?
Yeah, good question. I think, I guess I have a maybe a little unique role in the State Department of Agriculture and then now at the City of Seattle. And I think that's why I put the slides at the front of just OSC as a department, and the City of Seattle has race conscious or racial justice initiatives explicitly baked into explicit discussions about that baked into how staff are trained and what the commitment of that agency is, that I think is different. I don't think that the Department of Agriculture in Washington State, someone else can correct if I'm wrong, has a statement to that effect, right? Or is having, and not that the City of Seattle has gotten it right either all the time and in every way, but I think that affects kind of how, and probably is a result of different politics and perspectives on racial justice and what that looks like in different parts of the state that a statewide agency has to grapple with. I'm not saying that's easy either, but that's I think there is a little bit of it's just a difference. And I think on the flip side, the Washington State Department of Agriculture recently, the legislature had them directed them to work on racial equity in farming and develop a report, and WSU Extension and other folks at the statewide level have been feeling the push into doing more of that work. I'll put it that way, I think.
And I'm glad you mentioned that report, Chris. I actually used that as one of the sort of references as our planning team was trying to better understand, what assessments have been done around equity and ag in each different state. So I was excited to see that Washington State had started to do that work a little bit. And got an interesting note here from Mary. I don't know, Mary, if you feel like you could come off mute for a second and share, if you're in a space to do that.
Sure, I am. So I sit on the State Food Policy Forum, and Chris mentioned the one that we had in Seattle, King County for a while. It was a lot of work that didn't really materialize very well. But there is, in particular, because I work in food systems as well, there is a divide between Western Washington and Eastern Washington. With respect to agriculture in itself, most of the large scale agriculture is happening on the east side of the state. And it's the smaller scale ag that's happening on the west side of the state. And particularly in urbanizing areas like central Puget Sound, land access, water access, access to technical assistance, like loans to access land, bridge loans, all those things are critically important. But I think the bright part, and it's really easy to fall kind of into that trap of, well, us and them. Like, but the food policy forum that I sit on is really trying to bridge that divide and make sure that agriculture is part of all the conversations that's happening in the state, especially as it relates to access to water and land for agriculture. But there are networks of advocates across the state, which is really heartening. They've grown over the decades that I've been in this arena, and there are very vocal folks in all sorts of places that would surprise you, that are kind of in this battle collectively with us. So it's not all us and them.
Mhm. Thanks so much, Mary. I appreciate that. And, you know, in Oregon, we similarly have an Oregon Community Food Systems Network that's fabulous. Shout out to folks who are on the call that are part of that network. And I know some great people in Eastern Oregon who are really trying to center racial justice in the way that they're doing their work there. And, you know, it's an important starting conversation. So, are there any other final questions? I know Chris needs to run to another meeting here in a moment, but thanks so much, Mary, for sharing. And thank you, Chris. I'm really excited to take some of the ideas that you brought into this space. And when we go out into breakout rooms next, we're going to kind of chew on some of the ideas. So I know it's been a little quiet in the Zoom room, but I really appreciate your time and it's been super valuable. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. I can stay on a few minutes longer. And thanks,
Okay.
Mary, for chiming in and adding all that. I just want to one point on this topic because it's really interesting, the urban rural divide, east west, et cetera. And I will say, I think for better or worse, sometimes like how we talk about the same issues of small scale and direct marketing growers and farmers, for example, need support for these reasons. In particular, you know, Latinx or underrepresented, underserved growers for these reasons, why the WSDA report and others. I think starting to get that lexicon and language for how to talk about those issues, not dissimilar from how we need to talk about climate change in different ways in different communities sometimes too, can be a useful parallel maybe. We still got to do the work and address those issues, but yeah, there's different ways to approach it.
Yeah, that's super helpful, especially that parallel between the, you know, climate change conversations. It's really important that we meet people where they are and find the language that is more inclusive on a lot of different levels. All right. Well, folks, I think we're going to transition into our breakout room space now. Thank you so much, Chris. Let me unpin you here. I think I was able to do that. If you want to stop sharing. Thanks again. Thank you so much. Let's see if there's any other good comment from Diane there. All right. Well, for everyone, I know that's been a lot of information to think about and process in terms of collaborative partnerships and thinking about how we better catalyze our power. And I'm excited to now shift into some smaller breakout rooms, like 3 to 4 people or so. And I thought it would be great for us to have a volunteer, once you're in the breakout room, kind of bring up an idea about a change that you would like to see in your work and brainstorm with the other folks in that space how to go through that. So I've put together a little breakout sheet that I'll put in the chat to guide you. Oh, thanks, Melissa. On it. So the idea is get into the room, make sure to introduce yourself. Again, trying to build some relationships here and take a moment to get a volunteer to share a change that you want to achieve. And then someone can be also just listening in the space to be able to share back when we get back into this broader space. And then sort of brainstorm different ideas and how you can get from where you are to the goal that you're trying to get to. And I think it's great to start with dreaming big and then breaking it down into actionable steps. Got some possible discussion questions here. And for folks who were able to attend the last session with Addie on coaching, I thought a great part of that process was really to share different questions that we can have discussions around. So I also put some of those questions in this document. And so, yeah, I thought it would be great for us to spend some time to really think through how we can make these actions real in our work, whether that's at an individual level, at the organizational level, or more at the systemic level. And so thanks for being willing to head into a breakout room and build some solutions together.
Okay, I can share. I started typing in the chat, but it was really helpful to brainstorm ideas. So yeah, there's like funding streams coming in for some new initiatives. I'm thinking of like the city of Portland, and there's some zoning. Zoning rules that some of these initiatives might bump up against. So brainstorming, who to invite, to have some of these conversations, and maybe farmers that have implemented some of these strategies, what hurdles did they do, but without raising any red flags, for producers that might have implemented some of these practices, without going through the zoning office. So it was just a really good conversation of like brainstorming and thinking about equity in that realm. So
thank you, Heidi. I really appreciate that. Yeah, that's definitely an issue I think we've all seen. Well, we just have a few minutes left, I see, until we are done with our series for 2024. I just want to thank folks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join. We started off talking about some of the more technical aspects of water resilience on small farms, and then we sort of slowly moved through the series to talk a little bit more about how we do our work, with the coaching session last week, which I think was particularly impactful for a lot of folks. And I'm excited to move more in that direction. As I mentioned at the top of the call, this is a multi-year federally funded project, and we're looking forward to having more workshops in 2025. I think it might be a little bit more frequent rather than having them all jam-packed into November, and that we want to have some more informal kind of office hours, problem solving, and then also get a little bit more specific. Some of the folks answered a form when you registered that shared a little bit more about what you want to learn about. So I think there'll probably be at least a rainwater catchment session in 2024 or 2025. I'm sorry, I'm not quite ready to go to 2025 yet, clearly. It would be really helpful if you all could respond to our evaluation. And so thank you so much, Melissa, for putting that there. And if everyone could turn on their screens one last time, and we can just give each other all a big round of applause for taking the time out of your busy schedule to learn and meet each other. So thank you all for being willing to do this, and I really appreciate your time and participation. Thanks so much. Take good care.
Thank you.
And any planning team members, if you want to stay for a second, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Oh, I should have said the planning team members a moment before then. Any feedback from those folks still left? Thanks, Robin. You can head out, and Stephanie, if you're still there, we're closing out.
I pause the recording.
Oh, yes.